Water. Earth. Fire. Air.
If you're a fan of the classic Nickelodeon animation series of Avatar: The Last Airbender, whatever hopes you had for the Netflix live-action adaptation, it's best to just let them go now and hook back up with them later. I'd rather get a fireball shot up my ass by Fire Lord Ozai himself than watch another live-action iteration of Avatar: The Last Airbender again. Let me start off by saying no, this is nowhere close to being as bad as M. Night Shyamalan's jaw-dropping disaster piece. M. Night couldn't even bother to get the pronunciations of the main characters' names right.
My name is Aang. And I'm the Avatar.
A movie so dumb it imprisoned earthbenders inside an outdoor jail surrounded by Earth. They needed Aang, or Aang in case of this dumb film, to point this little factoid out to everybody. And who could forget the hilarious song and dance routine from the earthbenders, only to pick up one tiny little puny boulder. This is ridiculous. No, the live-action Netflix series learned from M. Night's mistakes. In return, it is the melodramatic shell of a TV show filled to the brim with so much exposition it feels like you're punching into work just to finish a single episode, only to be fired at the end of the shift. But the main questions that stood out from all the rest while watching the Netflix version was, why? Why remake one of the most beloved franchises of not just animation, but all of television if it's perfect already? Why take away vital character dynamics like Sokka's sarcasm and sexism, unless it's to make sure not to offend anyone? Why make this at all? The world built in Avatar is massive. Couldn't they have just made a show about any of the previous Avatars before Aang, or one of the next ones after Korra? And lastly, why is there a hole in the bathroom stall at the truck stop I write this in? The plot thickens.
What you two have discovered today is what is most commonly referred to as a glory hole.
The plot of the show remains the same as the animated version. Set in a war-torn world controlled by an oppressive fire nation, some people can physically manipulate or bend one of the four elements. Aang is the Avatar. The Avatar is the only one who can bend all four elements, and he's the savior who could bring down the oppressive Fire Nation regime, bringing balance to the world. But Aang has only mastered his native element of airbending. He's tasked with seeking out masters who can bend the other three elements while being pursued by the exiled Fire Nation Prince Zuko, who seeks to regain his rightful place by capturing the Avatar, someone who the rest of the world thinks has vanished long ago. The Netflix version of Avatar: The Last Airbender has an uncanny valley nature to it. It's slightly off and in a creepy way. This show is more like a death from 1,000 cuts rather than a 2-hour stillbirth. It doesn't help matters much that the original creators Brian Konietzko and Michael Dante Di Martino left the project in 2020, citing the all too familiar creative differences. Clearly they didn't have the same contract for control that Eiichiro Oda had drawn up before the live-action adaptation of One Piece went into pre-production.
Losers, in other words.
Everything with this Netflix adaptation has been stripped down, muted, or distorted for exposition. If it's not for exposition, it's attempting to court the never-present modern audience with its sensitive sensibilities. And that's just the characters. First, there has to be credit where credit's due, okay? They got the costumes down right. In particular, the Kyoshi warriors made the animation look like blueprints. Farnaz Kaki Sadiq nailed the costume designs for each nation. Christ, live-action Avatar is so bad it has me talking like a gay man. I'm praising costume designers. I gotta move on to set pieces quick. The set pieces, when they are actually trying to mirror the animated series, are on point. The Air Temple, Wolf Cove, the Fire Nation, the Earth Kingdom, and more are spot on and accurate. But when the show deviates from its source material is when the set pieces collapse and people died. Like Wan Shi Tong's library, which doesn't exist now. The wise and powerful owl spirit who collects information for his spirit library is now in the forest with no library to speak of. He's no longer the threat Avatar fans know him to be. Instead of trying to peck Team Avatar's eyes out through their asses, Wan Shi Tong now guides them through the spirit world. Much like his library, they made Wan Shi Tong's giant owl balls disappear. It's slight changes like this that seem like nitpicks, but I assure you they're not. If it was a budgetary concern, there are simple workarounds, but the creative team on live action Avatar seem allergic to finding them. Instead, they establish the pattern of exposition and then action and then some more exposition, and when the exposition seems to get staler than a dry white turd on snow, they introduce a new character or have some more action. And in general, the action sequences are all wrong. They are in this show because the creative team feels like something exciting should happen between bouts of exposition rather than a necessity to serve the story on a much greater scale. The best part of the original Avatar's fight scenes was the hero's cleverness in which they bended the elements to give themselves a needed advantage over a much stronger opponent. In Netflix's Avatar, the cleverness was abandoned for the sake of just having choreography blended with bad CGI. And yes, don't let anybody lie to you, this is terrible CGI. Some of these character choices during fights make you believe in reincarnation because nobody can be this dumb in one lifetime. Take for instance the first prologue. A prologue that is as useless as an ejector seat on a helicopter. An earthbender is on the run. The Fire Nation is after him because he holds a scroll warning the Earth Nation it will be under attack. When the runner is separated from his scroll, he bends the earth to fling it at his counterpart. To buy his friend some time, he lifts a wall between him and his friend, giving him a chance to escape. And none of this has a sense of urgency or tension or brains. If he had enough time to build a wall between him and his friend, he has enough time to build a wall between himself and the firebenders that are chasing him. It would have been a much more tense scene if the earthbenders hopped on with his friend, thinking they were safe, only to be chased down by more firebenders. He's knocked off his saddle, forced to hold him off long enough for his friend to escape. Instead, we have this rushed action sequence inside the first two useless prologues. Later in the same episode, Aang escapes Zuko's capture by the way of his flying bison Appa, and much needed coincidence, Zuko shoots a fireball into the air. And when this baby launches from his hand, you will have enough time to figure out who the real Zodiac killer is before it lands. And land it does, with no attempt from Team Avatar to move 3 inches to the left and watch it sail on by them.
Here it comes.
Here it comes.
You will be destroyed.
You're going
The
down.
explosion will be of extraordinary magnitude.
Nice shot there, Brickout.
The second prologue is also useless. It is a rush job through Aang's backstory so quick it was like an Olympic sprinter who had diarrhea. We follow Aang the day before the Fire Nation attacks the Air Temple. The world is at the brink of war, and now it's time to tell Aang he's the Avatar. They have a Jedi Council meeting about this to determine if he's too young, but time is running out, and he needs to master all the elements in order to bring the oncoming war to a halt. They come to a consensus, and they tell Aang exactly who he is. In anger, Aang turns on the temple and wipes out the younglings. Wait, I'm getting my fucking scenes mixed up. This prologue is mostly in the show, but trickled throughout the series, only giving snippets at key moments to make Aang a more interesting and dynamic hero, filled with guilt that he couldn't save not just his nation, but the world itself. I mean, even for a kid's show, you feel his anguish. Anguish. Fuck, I cracked myself up. But in the Netflix Avatar, you are robbed of these discoveries because you know them before Aang does. You've already experienced the trauma. When Aang finally gets the news in another expositional scene by Gran the expositional water hag, we find ourselves waiting for Aang to get over it rather than sharing his pain. Also, it should be pointed out that Gran the water hag here goes over prologue scene number 2 in painstaking detail, so you essentially get the same scene twice. It is also here where we finally catch up to where the original show starts, and the adventure is on with the plot remaining fairly on track, but you will notice a tonal change. The original animation was lighthearted despite its heavier subject matter. This live action version has flipped that concept over, where it's got heavy subject matter with some moments of lighthearted relief. That is due to the fact that showrunner Albert Kim is quoted in saying that this is a Netflix drama and therefore has to appeal to the fans of Game of Thrones.
This doesn't make any sense.
Which makes an interesting quote for a couple of reasons. Game of Thrones was never on Netflix, but on HBO. And a quick mental consensus came back to me. An overwhelming majority of Game of Thrones fans are also Last Airbender fans. They can differentiate between the cartoonish violence of Avatar versus the brutal nature of Game of Thrones. And the voices in my head are never wrong. But also the ball-dropping, eye-gouging, cringe-inducing Season 8 of Game of Thrones is not exactly the picture you want to put in people's heads when they're hoping for a show to be good. This would be like Oda saying One Piece is now a Netflix drama and therefore has to woo the fans of Rings of Power. Wait, that's not fair. No one's a fan of Rings of Power. Most characters of this show, with the exception of Zuko, are flat and seem timid to even speak. This is not the fault of actors like Gordon Cormier or Gaio Windio, who seem like fine, capable young actors, but the direction of showrunner Albert Kim attempting to strike a serious chord. Instead of it being serious, though, it's melodramatic, witless, and dull. The character of Uncle Iroh, played by Paul Sun-hyung Lee, has been stripped of his slow and wise cadence, delivering lines without any sort of comedic timing nor the weight of his wise words. Again, I don't find fault in the actor, but the direction of the show. Much like the Air Temple, Aang's immaturity has been completely eliminated, leaving a kid who only seems like he's pretending to be serious because he feels like that's what he should be doing. His playfulness was part of his charm in the original show. What's left here is a kid on Ritalin. Somewhere inside this well-behaved zombie is a child who just wants to goof off. Sokka's sarcasm and sexism has all been muted. His sarcasm made the group dynamic very interesting, leading to one of the better arcs of the original show. His sexism helped him grow as a character, but it was Sokka's sexism that caused Katara to get so mad she bent the water behind him, cracking the ice and revealing Aang inside his bubble. No sexism, no savior. I always knew feminism was going to bring about the end of the world. Plus, there's nothing wrong with being sexy.
What's wrong with being sexy? I mean, there's no trouble with sex.
And I do have to say that Ian Owsley, the actor who plays Sokka, was perfectly casted. He looks and sounds just like Sokka. And there is even a moment or two where Albert Kim was asleep and Owsley got to play Sokka true to form. The show is dark, not just in tone, but in its look as well, taking you right back to M. Night's Avatar. But at least M. Night's version has the excuse of a last-minute conversion to 3D, a process that was notorious for dimming the perceived brightness of a film. Here in the Netflix version, the night scenes look like they were shot through a pair of the Blues Brothers sunglasses. My guess is to hide the lackluster effects. Watching these scenes is much like stumbling around the bathroom at midnight. I'm just going to guess what I'm looking at and take a piss. Some perfect shows just cannot be touched, reimagined, chopped down, or enhanced. Avatar: The Last Airbender was a perfect show for the perfect medium. It is well suited for animation and not transferable to live action at all. A new show about a different Avatar would have worked. The audience would have given the limitations of live action a lot of leeway, while being interested in learning about a new Avatar or one of Aang's predecessors. Instead, we get this second live action try and fail for Team Avatar. The title of the Netflix adaptation is Avatar: The Last Airbender. Let's hope so. If you enjoyed this video, you go ahead and smash that like button. While you're done doing that, hit the subscribe button. And then, after that, share this with your friends, family, people you hate. Maybe you don't like my content and just want to waste somebody's time. Do it. Share it. Thank you. It is much appreciated. I'm out of here.